Chapter 11. The Secret Reestablishment of the Kingdom of the Jews. Quote, "A light will shine forth among those that sit in darkness." End of quote. The previous chapter documented several things that completely disrupt traditional prophetic models that Mormons have taken for granted. It documents the fact that the Jerusalem of end times appears to generally refer to America, not the Old World Jerusalem. It appears to specifically refer to Kirtland, Ohio area. The book of Daniel had prophesied about the building of the Kirtland Temple. The work in which Joseph Smith was involved was fulfilling that which had been spoken by ancient prophets concerning the last days. We shall now take a closer look at the events of the Kirtland Temple, and then we shall take a closer look at the true identity of the transitioning membership of the restored church. Ultimately, I'm going to suggest that the ancient kingdom of Israel was secretly reestablished during the ministry of Joseph Smith. The Kirtland Temple. In a letter that Joseph Smith sent to N.C. Saxton, Joseph pointed out that the Gentiles were in the process of rejecting the fullness of the gospel and breaking the everlasting covenant spoken of by Isaiah and Malachi, resulting in God beginning to seal the heavens. This narrative emerges time and again as one studies the true history of Mormonism in conjunction with prophecy. Realizing that the fullness of the gospel was rejected by the saints of the restored church by December of 1834, and that the keys of the dispensation of the gospel of Abraham was secretly given to Joseph and Oliver on April 3, 1836, it becomes apparent that when the saints failed to redeem Zion by the appointed time of September 11, 1836, the dispensation of the gospel of Abraham was ushered in, and the knowledge of the gospel was taken to the house of Israel. A great time of transition was taking place between 1834 and 1838, as the dispensation of the fullness of the gospel of the Gentiles was coming to an end, and an ancient Abrahamic dispensation was secretly ushered in, resulting in the other remnants of God's people beginning to believe in the restored gospel through the establishment of foreign missions. These new converts were generally characterized by the Book of Mormon as the house of Israel. Nevertheless, both the Gentile members of the church and the remnants of the house of Israel were still hoping for the dispensation of the fullness of times to be ushered in. Many of the new converts did not fully understand that the fullness had been withdrawn, and that they were not aware of the secret ushering in of the dispensation of the gospel of Abraham. Many of the events during this transition involved ancient temple theology and some very significant events that took place in the Kirtland Temple during a Pentecostal period that lasted from about January of 1836 and continuing for many months beyond the secret appearance of Christ on April 3, 1836. It's hard to overstate the importance of the Kirtland Temple. Sidney Rigdon had declared that the salvation of the church hinged on the completion of the Kirtland Temple. Quote, "Upon it depends the salvation of the church and also of the world." End of quote. And that's in the Times and Seasons, Volume 6. Shortly after the Pentecostal period and the failure to redeem Zion by September of 1836, a dark spirit of apostasy infected the church as the Kirtland Safety Society fiasco took place. The following summary of major events pertaining to the Kirtland Temple reveals that even the ushering in of the dispensation of the fullness of times was still anticipated. It was anticipated despite the failure of the church to consecrate, despite the rejection of the Melchizedek order of the priesthood, and despite the special conference in which the name of Christ was officially taken out of the name of the restored church. Clearly, the restored church that had come forth out of the wilderness of darkness was fleeing back into the wilderness of darkness while a different interim dispensation was secretly being ushered in. The book of Daniel refers to the secret event behind the veil on April 3, 1836 as the, quote, "vision and the prophecy," end of quote, and notes that the event would be, quote, "sealed up," end of quote, and kept secret for a time. Realizing what a pivotal role the Kirtland Temple played during that time, let us review the major events that took place in and relating to the temple. Summary of key events closely related to the Kirtland Temple. January 15, 1836, meeting in temple called by the First Presidency to fill up all vacancies in all of the priesthood quorums. January 21st to February 6, 1836. The washing and anointing with holy oil of the priesthood brethren began to take place within the temple. Joseph Smith had a vision of the celestial kingdom. Related ceremonies lasted for up to 2 weeks involving the different priesthood quorums. On January 25th, the elders were instructed on how to prepare themselves for the holy anointing that would prepare them for the endowment of power, quote unquote, that was to take place during the upcoming solemn assembly, quote unquote, mentioned in section 88. Next is March 27, 1836. The dedicatory prayer was offered, petitioning the Lord that the yoke of bondage would begin to be taken off of the house of David, and the children of Judah might begin to return to the lands that God gave to Abraham, and that Jerusalem might begin to be redeemed. The Book of Mormon speaks of this as the time when the Jews would begin to be restored to their lands and, quote, begin to believe, end of quote. March 29, 1836, the First Presidency waited on the Lord in the most holy place to see if the time had come to redeem Zion and petitioning the Lord to allow them to travel to Zion. The time had not come, permission was not granted. March 30th, 1836, the solemn assembly involving 300 priesthood holders took place. The book of Daniel observes that this event took place in the middle of the week. As strange as it was that the First Presidency did not need to participate in the solemn assembly, it had apparently been revealed to them that this solemn assembly would not be the one mentioned in section 88 that would begin the final gathering of the elect. April 3rd of 1836. The events mentioned in section 1 took place. The book of Daniel refers to it as the vision and the prophecy that was sealed up and kept secret for a time. This section contains some of the greatest visions and prophecies of the LDS Restoration 1830 movement. During that event, the dispensation of the Gospel of Abraham was ushered in. April 5th, May through May 1st, 1836. The saints continued to have spiritual manifestations in the Kirtland Temple for about a month after the events in section 110 took place on April 3rd. Sadly, by the fall of 1836, 6 months after the secret vision behind the veil, the Spirit of the Lord began to withdraw from the saints. This takes place remarkably close to the September 11th deadline given by the Lord for the redemption of Zion that warned that the stronghold would no longer continue in Kirtland. The Kirtland Safety Society would be created shortly thereafter and fail within about 14 months of that date, resulting in the Great Apostasy of Kirtland. June of 1837, the Lord revealed to Joseph that, quote, something new must be done for the salvation of the church, end of quote, and the calling and the ordination of the first foreign missionaries was initiated. And on or about the 1st of June in 1837. Heber C. Kimball, one of the 12, was set apart by the spirit of prophecy and revelation, prayer, and laying on of the hands of the First Presidency to provide over a mission to England to be the first foreign mission of the Church of Christ in the last days. July 23rd of 1837, the same day the gospel was first preached in England, Joseph Smith received the ominous warning in section 112, quote, Verily, verily, I say unto you, darkness covereth the earth, and gross darkness the minds of the people, and all flesh is become corrupt before my face. Behold, vengeance cometh speedily upon the inhabitants of the earth, a day of wrath, a day of burning, a day of desolation, of weeping, of mourning, and of lamentation, and as a whirlwind as that shall come upon all the face of the earth, saith the Lord. And upon my house, brackets, Kirtland Temple, end of bracket, shall it begin, and from my house shall it go forth, saith the Lord. First among those among you, saith the Lord, who have professed to know my name, and have not known me, and have blasphemed against me in the midst of my house, brackets, Kirtland Temple, saith the Lord. Fall of 1837. A fight broke out in the Kirtland Temple. The temple was defiled. If it had not been defiled previously, it certainly was defiled at that time. Both Mother Smith and Eliza Arsenault mention the fight, but do not give the exact date. It appears to be shortly after section 112 was given. secrets begin to emerge. As one begins to understand more fully what really took place in the Kirtland Temple, including the secret vision that occurred on April 3, 1836, additional secrets will emerge and become understood. In this segment, I want to highlight the secret reestablishment of the Latter-day Kingdom of the Jews. A great secret that needs to be understood to better understand the significance of Section 110 is that during Joseph Smith's ministry, the latter-day restoration of the Jews and the reestablishment of the house of David and the kingdom of Israel was taking place shortly after the Gentiles rejected the fullness of the gospel and broke the everlasting covenant. An ancient kingdom was being reestablished amid the turmoil of the Kirtland apostasy. In conjunction with the emergence of this ancient kingdom, there was one more significant temple-related event worthy of mention that should be included among the noteworthy events listed above. But it's an obscure event that is difficult to attach an exact date. It has to do with an animal sacrifice that actually took place within the Kirtland Temple. Little documentation is available about this event. The following entry is found in the Journal of Wandle Mace. Quote, "The quorum of the 12 had been filled, but of the number selected one, Willard Richards, was in England, and Joseph was instructing those present of that quorum how they must proceed to prepare themselves, that they might ordain Willard Richards to the apostleship when they should reach that county. Joseph told them to go to Kirtland and cleanse and purify a certain room in the temple, that they must kill a lamb and offer a sacrifice unto the Lord, which should prepare them and to ordain Willard Richards a member of the quorum of the 12 apostles. Sidney made some remarks. When Joseph spoke with great power and spirit, said he, 'I know the law.' To a remark made by Heber C. Kimball, he said, 'It will be the sweetest smelling savor you ever smelled.'" End of quote. Associating this ordinance with the ordination of one of the 12 apostles may seem like a curious transaction, but it actually makes perfect sense. It provides additional evidence that the administrative priesthood overseeing the Kirtland Temple activities and the commission given to the quorum of the 12 was not the Melchizedek priesthood, which had been restored in 1831, but lost by December of 1834. Rather, it was an ancient patriarchal priesthood pertaining to the gospel of Abraham, referring to the secret vision behind the veil in the Kirtland Temple on April 3, 1836. Isaiah refers to the emergence of former things in the last days that he shows to his people, quote, "suddenly," end of quote, because they are, quote, "obstinate," end of quote. He identifies this group of people as those that, quote, "call themselves of the holy city, but they do not stay themselves upon the God of Israel," end of quote. Interestingly, many Jews interpret Numbers 19:1-3 to be providing prophetic instruction on how to offer a purification, cleansing ritual for the temple, which would be required to usher in the long-awaited appearance of the Messiah. Quote, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the ordinance of the law, which the Lord hath commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer without spot, wherein is no blemish, and upon which never came yoke. And ye shall give her unto Eleazar the priest, that he may bring her forth without the camp, and one shall slay her before his face." End of quote. Although very little is known about the animal sacrifice that took place in the Kirtland Temple, the event appears to validate the reestablishment of ancient temple rites and statutes and the emergence of an ancient kingdom directed by an ancient patriarchal priesthood. The Book of Mormon identifies the latter-day Jews. Many Mormons are blinded to the shocking reality that, according to the Book of Mormon and modern revelation, the modern Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually represents the latter-day kingdom of the Jews. Because of this, it becomes necessary to lay a foundation before we can address the literal fulfillment of the prophecies of the Book of Daniel, which took place during the Kirtland era of the Church. To do so, we'll first call upon the words of modern revelation, and then we'll visit the prophecies contained in the Book of Mormon regarding the latter-day restoration of the Jews. Then, we will highlight and analyze some of the prophetic dialogue between God, Moses, and the children of Israel, as contained in Deuteronomy 28-32. This will hopefully bring to light the significance of why Jesus Christ was standing above a, quote, paved work of pure gold, end of quote, when he appeared to Joseph and Oliver behind the veil in the temple. After gaining a better understanding of the significance of the Ark of the Testimony, containing the testimony embedded in the Song of Moses, other paradigms will change and additional heretofore hidden truths from the secret vision will emerge. In a future chapter, we will examine the outrageous but true prophetic statements that Joseph Smith published to the world in 1833 through his letter to N.C. Saxton. In the letter, Joseph explains that the Gentiles are the ones Isaiah referred to when he claimed that God's people had transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant. Because of this, we can see the necessity of taking the knowledge of the gospel from the Gentiles, ushering in a lesser law than the one that had been broken, establishing foreign missions to gather remnants of the kingdom of Judah, and reestablishing the kingdom of the Jews for the purpose of keeping the, quote, roots of the natural branches of the tree alive, end of quote, until the marvelous work begins 4 generations later. In a later chapter, we shall review several cryptic prophetic time sequences in the book of Daniel that will fit with events taking place in LDS church history, which further brings to light the significance of the Kirtland Temple. While doing this, we will use a few prophetic narratives to create prophetic templates of what was taking place in Kirtland, Ohio, and surrounding areas from 1829 to 1844. We will analyze the public prophetic utterances and declarations of Joseph Smith to show that his prophetic warnings given in the 1833 prophetic voice of warning were completely in sync with what the ancient prophets had spoken of and what was actually taking place in the world. There's an amazing storyline taking place behind the official storyline that was going on during the LDS Restoration movement that can only be seen through the lens provided by ancient and modern prophecy. The dedicatory prayer and the Judah Kingdom connection. The dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple proclaims that the servants of the Lord would one day go forth in power from this house, referring to the Kirtland Temple. The petition was that from this place, Kirtland Temple, glorious tidings would go forth unto the ends of the earth, and that the events having to do with the Kirtland Temple were fulfilling that which was spoken by the mouths of all the holy prophets concerning the last days. Few people realize just how much the Kirtland Temple, the sealed-up vision behind the veil, and the events related thereto are prophesied about by the ancient prophets in the Old Testament. The latter-day restoration of the Jews. Modern revelation debunks the notion that the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1848 or 1948 represents the fulfillment of prophecy regarding the gathering of the Jews. Sections 42, 45, 84, 109, 124, and 133 provide a narrative that puts the latter-day Jews and Jerusalem in America. Section 42. And for the purpose of purchasing lands for the public benefit of the church, and building houses of worship, and building up the New Jerusalem, which is hereafter to be revealed. That my covenant people may be gathered in one in that day when I shall come to my temple, and this I do for the salvation of my people. End of quote. In that day, many Mormons interpret verse 36 to be referring to Christ's coming in the far-off distance. I would submit, however, that the, quote, in the day when I shall come to my temple, end of quote, passage is not literally discussing what is often referred to as the second coming in glory, although it may provide a type. A literal fulfillment took place just 5 years after Section 42 was given, when Christ came to his temple in the secret vision behind the veil. These prophetic passages provide yet another testimony that Section 110 is true. April 3rd of 1836 represented the beginning of a new dispensational day. In 1831, it was called Today until Christ came to his temple. Section 64 also speaks of the current day or dispensation that preceded the Abrahamic dispensation that was secretly ushered in behind the curtain. Behold, now it is called today until the coming of the Son of Man, and verily it is a day of sacrifice, and a day of the tithing of my people, For he that is tithed shall not be burned at his coming. End of quote. The above passage differentiates the dispensation or day of the Gentiles that was in existence in 1831, shortly after the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood at the Morley farm, from the ancient Abrahamic dispensation or day that would secretly be ushered in 5 years later during the vision that would be sealed up and kept hidden. We are informed that during the fullness of the Gentiles, when the fullness of the gospel was on the earth during Joseph Smith's ministry, the saints were commanded to offer an ongoing sacrifice. Prophecy informs us that the daily sacrifice must return before the Lord's coming in glory. Modern and ancient scripture refers to it as the sacrifice of a broken heart and a contrite spirit. A second differentiating feature is that the dispensation or day of the Gentiles requires the tithing of God's people. The true principle of tithing is only possible as part of the law of consecration is contained in the law of the gospel in section 42. The preparatory gospel in the Abrahamic dispensation that was secretly ushered in 1836 does not require consecration. Section 45. And this I have told you concerning Jerusalem. And when that day shall come, shall a remnant be scattered among all nations, but they shall be gathered again, but they shall remain until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. End of quote. Here we are informed that the gathering of the Jews takes place after the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Shortly after the fullness of the gospel was rejected in or before 1834, missionaries were sent again to Canada. Converts from Canada, who were originally from England and had relatives in England, played a significant role in setting up foreign missions shortly after the keys of the gathering were committed to Joseph and Oliver behind the veil. Shortly after the keys of the gathering of Israel were committed, foreign missions were set up in England. Quote, and when the times of the Gentiles is come in, a light shall break forth among them that sit in darkness, and it shall be the fullness of my gospel. But they receive it not, for they perceive not the light, and they turn their hearts from me because of the precepts of men. Precepts means teachings, by the way. End of quote. The literal fulfillment of the above passages takes place when the marvelous work and a wonder begins. This means that we should not currently be looking for the times of the Gentiles to come to an end, as most Protestant and Mormon prophecy scholars do. Rather, we should be looking for the times of the Gentiles to come in again, to begin the ushering in of the dispensation of the fullness of times during the marvelous work and a wonder. It's critical to understand that when the Gentiles broke the everlasting covenant during the Kirtland era, a new era and dispensation secretly began as the Jews began to be grafted in and the kingdom of Judah was reestablished. Section 109. Quote, verily this is the word of the Lord, that the city New Jerusalem shall be built by the gathering of the saints, beginning at this place, brackets Kirtland, end of bracket, even the place of the brackets Kirtland, end of bracket, temple, which temple shall be reared in this generation. For verily this generation shall not all pass away until an house shall be built unto the Lord, and a cloud shall rest upon it, which cloud shall be even the glory of the Lord. We therefore ask thee to have mercy upon the children of Jacob, that Jerusalem, or Kirtland, from this hour may begin to be redeemed, and the yoke of bondage may begin to be broken off from the house of David, and the children of Judah may begin to return to the lands which thou didst give to Abraham their father. End of quote. The petition for the redemption of the remnants of the house of David and from the children of Judah was initiated in the dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple. As shown in the previous chapter, few Latter-day Saints realize that the term Jerusalem, as used in the dedicatory prayer, referred to Kirtland, Ohio, and surrounding areas, not the Jerusalem in the Old World. The term Jerusalem would again be used in a similar manner in sections 124 and 133. 1 week later, Moses committed the keys for the gathering to Joseph and Oliver. Shortly thereafter, another phase of missionary work began as foreign missions were established. Quote, on Sunday, 4th of June, 1837, the prophet approached Heber C. Kimball in the temple and whispered to him, Brother Heber, The Spirit of the Lord has whispered to me, let my servant Heber go to England and proclaim my gospel, and open the door of salvation to that nation." End of quote. Although Apostle Heber C. Kimball desired his close Masonic brother Brigham Young to accompany him to England, Joseph Smith needed Brigham's strong personality and support during the challenges of the Kirtland apostasy. Heber was given fellow apostle Orson Hyde as his companion in establishing the foreign missions. They were to preach the gospel and gather the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah, and graft them into the Latter-day Church. Kimball and Hyde would oversee Willard Richards and also, quote, Joseph Fielding, a native of Bedfordshire, England, who had immigrated to Canada in 1832, and 3 other Canadians, John Goodson, Isaac Russell, and John Snyder, who all had relatives and friends in England they corresponded with, end of quote. These brethren were, quote, converted to the gospel at the same time as John Taylor during Parley P. Pratt's mission into Canada, end of quote. These converts to the church from England were more than likely remnants of the ancient kingdom of Judah. They would play a critical role in gathering their friends and relatives in England into the church, gathering them to the latter-day land of milk and honey that God had promised to the children of Abraham as an inheritance. I'll do part 2, beginning with the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah are gathered to America.